Hey there, it's Britt. Welcome to a very special episode of More or Less. If you felt like 2024 flew by in the blink of an eye, you're not alone. It was a whirlwind, especially in the world of AI. We've curated some relevant conversations that we've had this past year surrounding its ups and downs, from OpenAI's custom GPTs to what we thought about Apple Intelligence. We'll round out the episode with recent clips from our conversations about Agentic AI, reflecting on its role in shaping the future. Let's start by revisiting a conversation we had back in October 2023 with the launch of OpenAI, an unforgettable developer day, which was then followed by the firing of OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman.
We had OpenAI Developer Day. More interesting than I thought.
I experienced OpenAI Developer Day, which I appreciated, by several people on Twitter saying, "Oh my God, Sam Lesson's right." And I didn't know what that meant, but I think I've pieced it together. And I always appreciate praise. I think the idea being that OpenAI has now swiped all these AI startups for sure, and being an AI startup is a bad idea, which has been my line for a while. Is that basically right?
Yeah, I was coming into this going, oh man, Sam gets to be called right on a whole bunch of vectors. And I think...
Oh, this is my favorite. Let's talk about this for the rest of the episode. Tell me all the ways I've been right.
But... I think that you also have to give OpenAI serious credit for being in just absolute beast mode right now. Like, this is one of, I think, the most impressive developer platform launches since maybe Facebook platform, if I do say so myself. And it's just unbelievable the amount of stuff they're putting out there. And while I think, Sam, your perspective has been broadly correct that, be careful which business you're getting into and which startups you're funding. I do think that another aspect of our conversation, which is the creator economy and how these new tools are going to be used by smaller entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, is actually quite an interesting conversation.
So can you riff on this with me? Because I actually haven't paid as much attention to this. What are the big unlocks for small businesses that OpenAI announced?
Can I go?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all you.
So just a couple hours ago, actually, I had thousands of women on a Zoom webinar, and I was for Self-Made, which is a women's business accelerator I help run. And I was explaining to them how...
Wait, you're underplaying it. Tell everyone what Self-Made is.
Self-Made started in the pandemic when millions of women were laid off or furloughed from their jobs. And I decided to help them just become entrepreneurs instead, to make their own revenue and have flexible hours, et cetera. Most of them are small business entrepreneurs and not necessarily venture scale. Some are venture scale.
Real entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And I was ladies, if I could reach through the screen, I would have, to shake them and be like, wake up. This is your moment. This is the time. Just yesterday, now there's GPT apps that you can create and bots and, all these different things. And, if you are first to the punch here, there's such an opportunity to start monetizing in so many new ways, and to not have to know how to build an app or something like that, and to have AI help you do things I thought what Sam demoed was really interesting, right? He took some lectures from his Y Combinator days, right? And he uploaded them, and then he made a Ask Sam bot, right? Which was
ask a VC advice. You guys are out of a job.
VC advice bot or something, right? And
that's exactly what the world needs, is VC advice bot. Thank God.
I know. That was what I was thinking.
I'm just saying, he did it in a matter of a minute, right? And so it just blows your mind,
impressive.
The power
totally
that can
impressive.
Exist. And how people can take advantage of it and monetize from it now.
So what's the monetization plan? Is you buy these bots and then you talk to them?
You get App Store revenue share. Basically, So you guys remember when we had Scott on the podcast and we talked about agents, right? And agents are going to be everywhere. You're going to have AIs to do this and AIs to do that. And I think, again, it's a compelling demo experience version 1, but to be able to create a GPT and train it on literally, like he opened his computer and dragged his lectures into it, right? Like I instantly thought for some reason onboarding. Like we have so many onboarding docs of the information, like so many, what's an information story? What I've written about it in a million times. Our team has talked about it a million ways. A basic thing. It's not going to replace having your onboarding session, but just like a little GPT.
So first of all, I love that they've managed to brand GPT as their thing. That's very clever of them.
I know. I thought that was a little funny too.
It's like, but that point aside, like, so do they get access to all these? Like, I actually just haven't followed this. So the idea is, and I bet not all of our listeners have, you get to take all of your content, you chuck it into a bot that you instantiate, and then basically people can chat with that bot, and they host it, and you can charge for it. Is that basically?
Yes.
Okay. Do they get access to the content? Who owns the content?
That's up to the creator. There are privacy controls over the content. You can set your own policies.
Is there any reason that the creator would be incentivized to let OpenAI have access to the content?
I guess it would be up to the creator, right? Like, do they think?
But is there any benefit to letting OpenAI having access to it?
Or I'm not sure. It's a great question because there's also debating. Like the rev share is a little murky because like it's a cut of like. I think that's a good question to look into, understanding like the subscription rev share a little bit. Obviously, there's also like, I think
is it a subscription overall, or do I charge my own? Like, is it a bot that I'm selling and they get a cut, or is it like I get some piece of
the Apple App Store? It's like the App Store.
Yeah, it's a bot that they're selling that both sides get a cut.
Okay, interesting.
And then there's also, Sam, enterprise customers can also deploy internal only GPTs.
Yeah. So is it basically the story of instead of writing a book, because no one's going to read my fucking book anymore, instead I just basically dump my book into GPT and let the conversation happen?
No, because it's push versus pull, right? Like if you want to push your book onto people versus like force people to ask questions that they don't know what to ask you about.
You will definitely create a Sam GPT. I'm surprised you haven't.
Of course I will. I mean, I already have actually.
Frankly, guys, I think we should create a more or less GPT. We can just dump all of our transcripts from previous episodes.
But this is the thing. This is my question. Like, obviously, I'm actually curious in terms of how this will play out. Because like, I totally get this idea that like, you take a book, for instance, like there's a talk to an author type thing. It's like you can read the book, which is the story I told you, or like you can just be like, hey, here's a corpus of stuff I've generated and now ask it questions.
Yeah.
I believe that's a thing, but it's not 100. Like it's same thing with like a knowledge base for how to use an app, right? If you said like, okay, like, you know, instead of your documentation, you know, O'Reilly style, it's like, I'd rather have that in a Q&A-able thing. I get that. But it is an interesting form factor in terms of like how people will actually buy and interact with these things. It basically is just content with a different index into it.
Yeah. I mean, Sam, I was thinking about this because I started messing around with, I started actually trying to write a therapy bot with content that I'm just, you know, aware of. And I started working through it. And really that's what I came to is that, oh, okay, now basically every author on earth can, you know, take their book content and put it into one of these bots and monetize it in another way. And it's yet to be seen how incrementally valuable that is on top of it.
It'd be interesting. It's like, Jess, I mean, you run a subscription business. Are you going to dump the entire information's archive into one of these things that people can ask questions of every article you've ever written?
Sure, why not?
Like, okay, so practically speaking, like, I'm actually curious. Is this like a very obvious use case for something like this?
I would charge a lot of money for it.
I'm going to make a Britain Cobot too.
But it's just like, it's easy. Like anyone who has content will just dump it in. The question is me, like, what's the distribution and why are you like, what's the value of it?
Yeah, well, I think these are all excellent questions. I think that the use case of chatting with a bot is going to exist, but I don't know how mainstream it's going to be. And I have one big question now is like, what is the usage of Bard? ChatGPT, like, obviously, we know information's reported a lot about their revenues surging at OpenAI. I mean, people are paying for this stuff. Companies and small businesses are paying for it. But like, you know, I haven't seen the chat bot interface like go through the moon yet. But I do think I think it will gain more traction. Whether, you know, do I think it's how people are going to want to consume their news? No. But do I think, you know, for our $1,000 pro tier, like doing some of the, it's a cool software product that some people get value out of. Absolutely. I mean, and what's so impressive, and again, it was a good demo, is they made it seem really easy. And really easy to refine, right, with natural language. And so
I think that's an interesting thing. I'm sure, again, I should watch it, and I'm sure it is a cool demo. And I just think it's like the fact that something's easy to make is not in and of itself make it a compelling product. Like, it's cool, right? Like, but I'd be very curious, like, what the actual, like, are people going to pay more for, like, the book that instead of it being read to them, right, or they're reading it, that, like, they can just ask questions?
Well, here's what I think. I mean, information subscribers are also subscribing to the information for knowledge, right? I mean, they're doing it to stay ahead, but we're a business publication, and people are, like, querying us to be like, have you written about this company and what's their latest revenue? As an example.
Totally. I mean, basically being like the information search function already, we moved over to like using some GPT based stuff. And you're like, look, and this has always been an obvious idea, which is like, you don't really want the results to be articles. You just want it to be answers in your search function, I think is completely fine, right? And like reasonable. I am curious the depth of use on that, right? And the form factor of it actually working, right? Also, there's like the product experience. Jess, again, I'm curious, like, how does it work? It's like, I totally get why you have a search function on your website or in your service. Obviously, going from search for a specific article result and then read the article is way shittier than just like the one box answer, right? Mm-hmm. If you have it in the archive. But my understanding is it an API based thing, or are they going to ask you to actually load like an app? Okay, it's an API, right? So you just dump it all in and you can pull it back. Yeah. So you'll end up using it for one boxes. I do wonder though, like, that's interesting. How does that work with a subscription model? Wouldn't it just be like a pay per call type thing then?
Well, you can decide who this GPT is visible to, right? You can make it private, you can make it public. So in the same way, like you could have your app, right?
But I'm saying, can you do this? Can you forget the bot thing where like you want to use the conversational interface? Like, is it set up in the current iteration where it's just like you can dump your entire archive in and do the one box results on an API? So you just
I don't know how much you can dump. Yeah. I mean, basically they're going to use this to obviously drive their enterprise business where they make their money. So yeah, I mean, Sam dragged like a speech into it, right? So
yeah, Sam, I think to answer Sam's question, I think we've been talking about the the GPTs functionality, which actually, if you look at their blog, they have two separate blog posts, and GPTs is kind of called out as its own thing, which is almost consumer grade, which I think reflects how we're talking about it. And then there's a separate post, which is all of the new APIs and new models and et cetera. And there's actually, Sam, to your question, a new API called the Assistance API, which effectively is exactly what you just asked. It includes, calling that function or that API call gives you access to code interpreter. You can use the retrieval engine, so you can augment the assistant with knowledge from outside their models. You can search on proprietary domain data, product information, et cetera, all the kind of stuff you're saying. And then you can also invoke other functions. And so you kind of have like an assistant API that you can call inside your app.
Like the current way you do this, right, with OpenAI or really with any of these types of systems, right, is you say, okay, you can't possibly put your entire content library into like the buffer, right, of these chat. There's just no chance. Like even if you expanded it, not even close. So what you do is you dump it all into a graph database, right?
Yep.
And you do it in two steps. Step one is you say, okay, you basically do like a graph, a vector database, not a graph database.
Yeah.
You put it in a vector database.
Embedding.
And like you basically do the embedding, you get it back, then you pass the query and you find like the 50 most relevant documents. And then you basically take the 50 most relevant documents and you chuck them into like a GPT style thing, right? And like say, hey, summarize this 50. So you basically do like a crude search to get like the kind of right area you're looking in, and then you do a narrow one. It's obviously better if you don't have to deal with all that infrastructure. You'll be like, here's everything I know, like do all that shit for me. I am curious how it's actually working in the background, right? Like, is it just doing that? They just packaged it up in a way that like you as the developer don't have to think about basically doing those two steps, right? Or is there
something? The answer is yes, Sam. And I think the other thing that they've done is they expanded the context window. So the context window is now 128K.
But that's not
to use your example, I mean, 128K is like 300 pages of text, right?
Yeah, but that's not that much. Like, 300 pages of text is great, like for the refined search, right? So like if you said, I like take just like the corpus of the information article, it's probably 10,000 articles, Jess, ish.
Sure, at least, yeah.
Whatever it is, right? You can take that, you can say, okay, embed it all, do the vectorizing stuff, right? Like pull back for the 300 pages, the most relevant, I don't know.
4 days ago, Sam Altman, we've talked about many times on this pod, the CEO of OpenAI, was fired. And we and the world were treated or notified by this from a letter from the OpenAI's board of directors, claiming that it was for not being consistently candid with the board. So Sam was fired. The board made it seem like corporate malfeasance. Usually when a board issues something like that, there's fraud, there's something. Instantly, the information others were reporting that Sam had no knowledge of an investigation. The picture was very unclear. And really, there appeared to be a power struggle with OpenAI's chief scientist, former co-founder and board member, and Sam over the future direction of the technology. So the narrative that quickly emerged was that whatever transpired, and I still don't think we know maybe even half of what transpired, but it was really related to this tension many people have long pointed out in OpenAI, began as a nonprofit, became under Sam Altman a for-profit in partnership with Microsoft to push to commercialize the technology, in part to make the money needed and to have a structure where it could partner to train its models and raise the capital it needed to do this. But what we understand now is obviously that has had huge ramifications internally on the politics at OpenAI, in big part, but we don't know if that's the only reason leading to this situation, which is still very unclear. Over the weekend, there were talks. Many employees, including the senior leadership, including the interim CEO, were very upset by this, started partnering, colluding with Sam and OpenAI's president, Greg Brockman, to get them back. Those talks failed. The same night, Sam and Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, announced that Sam was going to Microsoft with Greg to start a new artificial intelligence research lab. Microsoft said it would hire anyone from OpenAI who wanted to join. Hours later, 700-ish OpenAI employees said they would resign if the board wasn't pushed out and Sam and Greg were reinstated, and negotiations continue. So we've got really interesting issues about the direction of this technology. We've got personal and perhaps petty power struggles. We have major questions around governance, how a nonprofit board that wasn't even fully staffed could make a move like this and clearly fail to communicate its reasons. And we've got also, I think, like a fair amount of just pure old Silicon Valley employee activism at this point, right? And I think a really interesting story there. So I think that is the state of play. We can take this in a lot of directions. But Dave, what are your big picture takeaways as of the taping of this? And if I take a phone call, you'll know it's one of 4 people, and I will be right back.
Just leave your audio on, Jess, if that happens.
Yeah.
Well, I would add one bullet point to your list there. And I think we also have religious fundamentalism at play here, which I want to, I guess, put a fine point on, which I've been talking about it quite a bit in the back channel. But I think that, whatever side you're on the inside of this struggle, whether it's the Sam side or the Ilya research side, I think we have to point out that, this is a struggle around ideology to some extent. And I think, like you said, Jess, there's a bunch of stuff that we don't know. I think there's probably some very big things that we don't know. But focusing on what we do know, the research side of the AI community is largely a secular, almost always talks in a deeply religious tone. They've made the, AI, in particular the AGI technology, into almost a sacred, they've almost deified this technology. And I think this is
by AGI, Dave, you mean the idea that, well, unpack that for people. Like, what is that?
The idea here is that OpenAI was set up as a nonprofit organization to keep humanity safe in the case that AGI, artificial general intelligence, which has become the kind of moniker that we and everybody has started to use to talk about this technology and its kind of end or penultimate state, they've really started to worry that when this happens, humanity might be at risk. And they use the religious fundamentalist kind of positioning around this, that if and when this happens, we should all fear this with, kind of the fear of God, really. And that we've created a God. This God is going to potentially destroy us all. And that's the thing that I'm kind of fascinated by in relation to all of this. And I was actually talking about this before a lot of these articles came out. There's an article that came out from The Atlantic, which I think actually touches on this, where apparently internally they've been using, they have a saying, feel the AGI. They chant this. They created literally a wooden figurine representing AGI internally. And I think that the point I would like...
They burned it, right? You got to complete
They burned their deified effigy. And I guess the thing that I would say is that all fundamentalisms, and we've seen even, in the last few months, we've seen other forms of fundamentalism make grave miscalculations in terms of the actions that they take in the real world. And fundamentalisms in all of their forms, or the fundamentalist, philosophy becomes a cult, or whether a fundamentalist religion decides that it's okay to murder people on behalf of their cause, you end up making grave miscalculations. And I think that that's something we should be talking about more aggressively in the Valley, and that that's something to be discussed here.
So I couldn't agree more, Dave, that this is the fundamental thing. And the thing that is kind of wild to me is Sam is a fundamentalist on this, right? It's like, so it's very interesting to me that the stories become Ilya, the fundamentalist, versus Sam, the pragmatist who just wants to build a business. Because the reality is, Sam Altman, the founder, even has a private conference a year ago, not even a year ago, the story was not only is the only goal of OpenAI to protect against AGI, but interestingly, the way to do that is to be the first to create AGI, right? So the whole thing was actually which is, if you think about, I've been thinking about how to draw this flow chart of their actual mental model, which is all right, the only goal is to save humanity from AGI. The only way to save humanity from AGI is to create it first and trust us that we're the good people, because we will have created the AGI, and therefore we can keep it safe from bad AGI. Therefore, we must make infinite money in order to create so there's this weird flow chart, and somehow the way the pieces have gotten locked in, or the stories has been told, is the profit part, right, is now and the pragmatism is now associated with Sam, and the fundamentalism is associated with the board. But the reality is Sam founded the organization and is a religious.
I think that's an excellent point, Sam. And I want to go to you, Britt, because everyone in traditional business America, aka CNBC, Bobby CNBC, is how did this governance breakdown happen? And I think you just answered it. They've been, if everyone's drinking from the same religious kind of fire hose, right, including the investors. Now, I don't know that I would put Microsoft in that camp, so maybe they complicate that. But that kind of goes a long way towards explaining how you could basically have 4 independent people with their own sort of political power struggles, with Sam, even overseeing this. And then a lot of people and then how Sam, I just have so much reporting pointing to the fact that Sam knew he had problems with the board. And then a lot of people were like, well, why didn't he do anything about it? I think, again, if you're living in this construct of a sort of fundamentalist mentality, like it's easier to understand why you would overlook things that now we're all wondering why they're overlooked.
Well, I'll just add two things before we go to Britt, which is like, one is, everyone's like, oh, all the employees have voted, they're all pro Sam or like pro business. They've all were hired in like the last 6 months, right? Like the org is so fresh and they all came in to do the business side of it, So it's really interesting to think about like the fundamentalist foundings of OpenAI and control of it versus who now works there, which is a bunch of ex-Facebook people we all know who are just like, oh yeah, this is like clearly a good business, right? And so it's like really interesting to think about the org structure and what that even means.
$1 billion ARR.
Right. And so that's a piece of it. And then I also think it's just like, again, the big mistake with OpenAI, talking about fundamentalism, is they're very clever people. And the idea was to have their cake and eat it too, right? So they set up a nonprofit board. They tell all the investors, no, not only can you not have any board seats, you can't even own a piece of the company, right? Because our mission is so important on a 1,000-year basis, and we're going to need more money than you can possibly fathom, and blah, blah, blah.
They did give employees equity, though.
Is it actual equity?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they certainly haven't given investors equity, right?
Right. But but employees get equity. And in fact, one of the travesties of this is that
cap profit is not equity. Cap profit is proxy equity, right? Like
no, I understand. They had equity that they were in the process of selling in a secondary tender valued at $86 billion.
Interesting. I don't know the details of that, and it's interesting for me to hear because my understanding was that the whole point was that they basically the whole thing is owned by the nonprofit, right? And they've made a big point of that, right? Is that they're going to...
It's controlled by the nonprofit.
Yeah, okay. So fine. We can talk about the differences between ownership and control and what's an RSU versus whatever. But thematically, the idea was set it up in a way that the nonprofit controls everything forever with a non-economically motivated board, right? It's like hilarious. Like their disclaimers about, oh, well, this might be worth a lot of money, but money might mean nothing once we're done, right? Like it's ridiculous, over the top marketing, right? Coupled with kind of the realities of trying to build a for-profit business. And I think it's like a lot of very overinflated egos, right? That have now gotten caught in this very weird situation.
And zealots, right? To your point. But Britt, over to you. What are you holding in your head and thinking about?
So a couple things. One, I think anytime you need a flow chart to explain how your board works and is hired, you're probably starting from a bad position. The second thing is, I feel like Satya is getting like all this credit for like saving OpenAI and like, doing the right thing. And I don't think a lot of people are recognizing like he like hit a Hail Mary and he was screwed. And like, frankly, I'm surprised that Microsoft and Sequoia and Thrive like didn't do more board diligence when they were investing all of this money to figure out like
this FTX all over again.
This board was like not adequate for the type of company that this has become. And so now, oh God, I'm going to lose $11 billion overnight. I better like figure out how to like, hit this one out of the park and get Sam to join me or else I'm screwed. And like Microsoft barely is holding on to its stock price right now. And we'll see what happens next. But I just feel like if that didn't happen, like it would be a world of trouble. And I think a lot of like fingers pointed at Satya to be like, what the hell were you doing when you invested in not like doing all this like diligence around the board itself?
Sam, well, you're waving, you're gesticulating. What would you like to say?
Look, here's the reality. $11 billion is completely irrelevant to Microsoft, right? It's a $3 trillion company, right? Like they can spend $11 billion.
That's nothing though.
No, it is.
Like any amount of diligence.
The thing that matters.
But guys, we're forgetting, right? So there's shareholders and they're speaking to the market, but there's also customers. And so that's a really fascinating part of what's happening because if you're Satya, you shouldn't be worried about Wall Street. You should be worried about Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, right? These customers who, when you trust and they're doing enterprise grade, millions, tens of millions, probably more levels integration, multi-year. And do you want your partner to be the one who went into bed with like a hot startup-y thing that has all these issues and where you didn't even have a board seat or a board observer seat or anything of the equivalent, right?
I mean, to me, this is actually the key point in the miscalculation, right? What does fundamentalism do? It blinds you to the reality on the ground most often. And the reality on the ground is exactly what you said. Microsoft has enormously huge customers that are using Azure to deliver, services to their customers. The other thing that happened over the last year, and it's funny, like literally 1 year ago, I was sitting at a table with both Adam D'Angelo and Greg and having some interesting conversations. And it's shocking to me how much has changed in 1 year, right? Like this went from being a nonprofit research organization with a lot of really, interesting ideas, definitely fundamentalist, to being the tip of the spear, not just for Microsoft and their customers, but for all of Silicon Valley. The Silicon Valley machine, once this happens, once a set of APIs emerges that becomes the focus for the entire Silicon Valley global idea, everyone starts conspiring together. And so it's not just these big customers that you refer to, Jess, it's tens of thousands of startups, right? And these startups, and we're talking billions, tens of billions of dollars of investment in startups that's going on. And all of those people's lives are also, and they're, the future of their startups are also at risk, right? And so I think the customer point can't be underestimated. And by the way, right before we started the podcast, I checked, and ChatGPT is down right now.
So I want to bring us to a conclusion with two questions for each of you. The first, you're the OpenAI board. Based on what you know so far, do you vote for or against Sam Altman as CEO of OpenAI?
Wow.
Didn't prep this one. Didn't prep it. Sam Lessin, you first in the hot seat.
So it's interesting because I think it actually comes down to how religious are they, right? Like the short term.
No, you, Sam Lessin, are in that seat. What do you do?
If I'm in the seat, I don't bring them back, right?
You don't.
Why not? I say it's the ring of power. I threw it away, and hopefully, and the reason I do that honestly is I think that any structure that he'll be able to work in next and like that moves LLMs forward, like Microsoft, will be a dramatically more constrained structure, which forces it to be a good business application, but does my actual primary goal, which is push out the AGI thing, because it won't fund it. Microsoft's not going to fund AGI. And like, I accept the fact that the Chinese or some other Yahoos are probably working on it. But I also have enough respect for the talent that we put together that if I really believe the AGI story, which they clearly do, that like I've kind of like thrown away the ring of power.
Okay, Britt.
I think I bring him back, but I create a new set of checks and balances that actually work to try to meet as many expectations as possible. And I just think the Microsoft thing is going to get really messy really fast with like the Microsoft shareholders, the public company, all the inter-organization stuff. Like I know Satya said it's going to be arm's length. I just don't buy into that. And so I don't see us making the progress that we need to make if he doesn't come back.
Okay, Dave.
The one question that I have is, what information don't we know? And this goes back to my comments about Adam. I think there's something we don't know. Like my intuition is that there's still something we don't know. And so I'm going to make my comments based on what we do know. If there's something we don't know, which is, who knows? There's, an AGI system that appeared in the last 2 weeks that, told them something really scary, or there's some, who knows, some crazy.
There was that. We do know that, by the way, or we know that the religious leaders who use this as a tactic of cultdom have been telling us that they saw something that for the first time that blew their mind, only like their mind had been blown twice in history before since the dawn of man.
Well, maybe
I believe that was a direct quote.
What a great way to sell business services.
All right. And my only other caveat.
Okay, but what does Dave vote?
My other caveat is if there's something else dark and, crazy that went on with data or something like that. If that happened, then my vote would be the opposite direction. But my vote would be to put him back, to vote him back in. And I would do that with the creation of a if it's going to stay a nonprofit or, whatever, I would do a 2-board structure. The board that I run is a 2-board structure based on the Harvard Corporation and based on the Rockefeller Foundation, which effectively has one board that is the managing board. And that board has to send all potential nominees to the board up to the, what I think of it like a Supreme Court board that kind of plays the role of making sure that the managing board can't become captive. And there should be some kind of structure like that that provides a true, like, quite literal check and balance structure in place so that we can all trust that the governance of this situation, given if it is as, important of a technology as we're all saying, can be protected.
As the calendar turned to 2024, our conversations about AI grew more ambitious. In this next segment, guest Vinod Khosla joins us to discuss Apple's push for an AI ecosystem and the business realities of large language models. Let's dive right in.
Apple, big announcement that we have all been kind of waiting for, the unveiling of Apple Intelligence. That's a great place to start this week. And of course, a big part of that was Apple's partnership with OpenAI, which Vinod was the first venture capital investor in way back when. So I got to ask Vinod, what did you make of all the news out of Apple?
Well, first, I haven't caught up with all the news. That was reserved for the weekend. But Apple needed to do something. Siri was starting to go from a reputation to worse, if that was possible. But more importantly, they've demonstrated something that's really important. Computers interface with you directly. You don't have to futz around to get stuff from computers. Computers get you stuff. And I'd done a blog post on this topic a couple of months ago in the Information. This idea that computers will learn humans instead of humans needing to learn computers. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. That was exciting. Obviously, from an OpenAI perspective, it clearly establishes where OpenAI is in the competition for the best LLMs. Obviously, many people wanted that business and many things were evaluated. And so it's really rewarding to see where Apple thinks the best AI is. And I'm sure they considered where the best AI will be a year or two from now. So in many ways, validation for OpenAI and a really big milestone in how humans interface with machines.
I will say, Vinod, I think they did say Gemini is coming as well. And we think they might do something with Anthropic. So not to diminish OpenAI having a great model, but I bring it up only in that it raises a question I'm wondering about, which is kind of if Apple's trying to recreate an app store, if you will, with this intelligence, and if the goal is to be, partnering broadly and routing to different services in the way that I remember when they first launched Siri, they said they were going to send you to OpenTable for reservations or, so on and so forth. So, Gia, do you have any insight into where you think Apple is going with the technology or even, I guess, more broadly, this idea of how apps and services are going to be discovered in AI? Because this obviously gets directly to the startup ecosystem.
I think first on the comment, it'd be smart of Apple to keep its options open and be able to go to any LLM. But they did make a choice in what gets embedded and built into the OS, enough for Elon Musk to get all upset about banning Apple devices. So they did make some pretty explicit choices and said, we'll keep options open. I presume I'm just going by your reporting. So I feel pretty good about that. But I do think the bigger thing is how do we interface with computers? And Siri is the beginning of what will evolve over time into agentic sort of interfaces for humans. And I think that's the big news.
Dave, what's on your mind with all of this? I know you're closely looking at startups in the space, as well as I kind of want to hear your headlines on Apple too, as someone who's I mean, I think you were one of the first people on this pod to bring up watching what they're doing by integrating chips with small language models. And I feel like a lot of the features we saw embedded into Apple Mail and so forth were kind of in your crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, I've been saying for a while that I think that Apple will be the one to bring the small models to market in a way that makes it very real for consumers and developers. And I guess one of the headlines that I've been thinking a lot about is that Apple they really showed that they have the trifecta down there of the ability to build technology, the ability to build platforms, and the ability to build products all at once. Most of the big tech companies can only do two of the three or one of the three. And so I think it's impressive that they're really bringing the full breadth of their real technology capabilities to bear here. And they're not just doing it in a way that is just talking about the technology, which is a lot what we've seen over the last year. And they're also not just doing it by bringing great things to consumers, though they did that. I think what's most impressive is the amount of developer tools and platforms that they dropped on the market yesterday. And there's a lot of esoteric things there, but I think developers and entrepreneurs are quite excited to have a bunch of new tools with very direct impact on some of these vertical businesses like Vinod's talking about, and a bunch of new goodies to do great new work. At the same time, the one thing that I was disappointed about is that you cannot access these local models directly. It's something that a lot of folks aren't talking about. They've put a pretty intense wrapper around it, at least on the developer front. You can use their Swift programming language and a bunch of components that show up in the UI and manifest these models into your applications. But to access the models directly as a developer, that's not something you can do yet. And so I think that actually is something that there isn't a whole lot of nuance in the coverage around right now. Because as a developer, like you guys are saying, you're either going to choose to go to OpenAI, pay the tax to use that API, or I think what a lot of developers thought was going to happen with this launch was that they were going to get to use these local models for highly specific use cases for free. And it doesn't appear that that's true yet today. And so I think that's like a very interesting nuance about what was announced yesterday that not a whole lot of people are covering. But I don't know. Other than that, I guess those are some initial thoughts on at least the Apple side of things.
So, no, can I ask you a question? I mean, you and I think in passing have talked even in the last year about kind of the future of big models versus small models, right? And one of the interesting things I think from what you're seeing with Apple is the idea that they can do a lot on device, and there can be a lot done with a small model. And then what is the place of kind of big models that are incredibly expensive and incredibly competitive long term? Do they just become content, and what is the positioning there? So I'm kind of curious, and again, knowing you haven't fully caught up yet, how you think about this is kind of, everyone was expecting small models, but like this is kind of seems like it's going to work, right? And kind of what that's going to look like.
Well, I think what on-device small models do will be different than what the large models do.
Sure.
If you want human level intelligence from a model, it'll be a big model, and there'll be a couple of them around, some better than others, some a year or two ahead of others. But I don't think small models substitute for big models, but they do some things really well. If you're talking to something with very low latency, you want as short a path, so that'd be a small model on device. In fact, I think Intel, even with its Meteor Lake new processors, bundling a small LLM with it. But they're meant to do responsive interfacing, not to be the source of intelligence.
Sure. But just to push you, and then I know we have a lot of ground to cover. It's almost like imagine a future where you have a lot of people you can talk to. Some have IQ 50, some have IQ 100, some have IQ 10,000, right? And the question is, where do you want to spend the money to ask the IQ 10,000 person a question versus asking the person who might have an IQ of 70 but knows what's in your email, right? And kind of what the balance of where questions get asked and where processing goes. So I guess my question is like, right now I feel like we're basically, and this is partially the cost of the models and the cost of you can compute for them, we're asking every question we can come up with to a really, really expensive PhD. And in the future, I think we'll be a lot smarter about what level of intelligence we need for different questions. How do you see that competitively playing?
I might disagree. I think what will happen is the expensive PhD will become dirt cheap. My bet is a year from now, it'll cost 1/5 to 1/10 of what it does today. And my advice to all our startups is ignore the cost of compute. Because any assumption you make, any dollar you spend on optimizing your software will be worthless within the year. And so forget about it. Rely on competition in the marketplace between Claude and Gemini and OpenAI to reduce that cost to a point where it doesn't matter. And below a certain level, it doesn't matter. You're paying a certain amount for your iPhone service monthly. Yeah. If it's 10% or less of that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Why do you think companies should ignore the cost and it's going to drop so precipitously? What are you seeing?
Because every large model owner is trying to drive it down.
Well, but Vinod, isn't each large model successively that's coming out costing like an order of magnitude more to train?
It is costing an order of magnitude more to train. And that's why I don't think open source models will be viable because of the training costs. But once you're trained, you want as broad a set of usage for two reasons. One, you want the most revenue from it, and the lowest cost models will get the most revenue. But more importantly, there's huge data generation for training the next generation of the model. So for lots of reasons, you want to maximize usage. And if you're playing the long game, and I think the AI model game is mostly being played sort of on a 5-year time horizon, not a 1-year time horizon. In that time horizon, costs will drop. Today, NVIDIA extracts a fairly good tax from everybody, but every model is going to run on multiple types of GPUs or compute, and they will want the most data generation. So I'm pretty convinced the next few years, the revenue isn't the important metric. You don't want to, of course, lose so much money you can't afford it, but you're not trying to make tons of money. You're trying to get tons of usage, and you're trying to get tons of data from the usage and learn to be a better model. I do think there's a lot to be gained in intelligence, whether it's reasoning, whether it's probabilistic thinking, whether it's sort of pattern matching, any of these things. And these models have lots of headroom to get better. And I think we'll see stunning advances practically every year. Much of this has been rumored. Some firms are executing better than others. I think that's the principal difference. I think OpenAI has been very good in execution. But Google has great technology and technologists. They just haven't been as crisp about their execution.
When Britt was referring to the AI skeptic as an investor, that's me. Like,
I didn't want to call you out.
Like, I'm a huge believer that the big companies are going to make an incredible amount of money on this technology. But as a seed investor, we're mostly seed investors on this call. I think what you're happening in the investment market is you're seeing a bunch of what I'll call not real venture capitalists, but asset managers plowing money into AI because it's easy to plow money into AI. And then you're seeing, and I give you a lot of credit for this, Vinod, because I know I consider you a real venture capitalist, and I know you actually deploy a lot of your own money, right? Unlike a lot of these other firms. You actually care about returns because it's actually your money as opposed to other people's money.
Only real venture capitalists on the more or less.
By the way, since I started the firm 20 years ago, I've never taken $1 in fees.
There you go.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's like we don't make money on fees.
This is, we're that's why, again, I have a lot of respect is you're a DPI guy,
That's cool.
Not an AUM guy.
Yep.
But again, you actually invest across the spectrum, right? And my kind of thing has been at the extreme at the seed investing. I think most seed investors getting into AI are playing a fool's errand because it's not a place where $1 to $3 million really can move the needle in terms of value, in terms of what the game is. So to me, it's like it's clearly a place the big guys win. You can argue about the middle, maybe, and I'd love to hear you obviously have a different opinion than me there. And then at the seed, it's a disaster from a VC perspective. I'm curious if you, I assume you think I'm wrong, but I'd be curious what your take is.
Well, let me give you some very specific examples. So I was pretty excited earlier in the podcast about Symbolica.
Yeah.
They came with a ridiculous set of claims in January or February of 2023. And I said, fine, I'll give you a $2 million seed. And if you prove this out, then we can talk more. They came back in March of this year, not very long ago, and said, here's the results that I promised. I said, don't go out. I'll write you a $15 million check tomorrow, which we did.
Yep.
So we just went ahead and did the financing. We didn't wait for outside pricing. We didn't wait for others to weigh in. I didn't care about anybody else's opinion. We bet on it. So that's sort of the small seed turning into a larger investment into something larger. By the way, we have a lot of robotic seeds too.
Yeah.
The little tiny ones that'll grow. But take Hedrol, the structural engineer I was talking about. It's a seed.
Yep.
It's never going to take 50 million or 100 million. It's going to be a seed that grows into a profitable business if that works.
Yep.
So I do think there's room for seed, but following what everybody else is doing is a bad strategy.
Yes.
Anytime somebody leaves DeepMind, give them $2 million, that's a bad strategy.
On this, we agree.
Finally, we got one, Sam.
We spend an incredible amount of time thinking about which business plan will be railroaded by GPT-5, GPT-6, Sora 2, Sora 3. Yep. And, we have pretty good access. We're reasonably good at predicting what will be railroaded and what won't be.
Yep.
And what will be good partnerships.
Yeah.
And now we're really zooming into building with AI. Vinod spoke about how smaller startups should work on leveraging LLMs for super niche problems. And for this next segment, we had a few guests with whom we started theorizing about an agentic future. We share some predictions on Gemini's perception and adoption as an agent, how Silicon Valley sees AI startups, and really how to find the business model in AI. To start, let's move ahead all the way to early October with news of OpenAI's record-breaking funding round.
OpenAI has raised the biggest venture round in the history of venture capital. I think we'll all agree it's not venture capital. So maybe that
just capital
is where we can start.
Those guys are playing golf is what they're doing.
They're playing golf.
Well, I also think one of the more interesting things that came out with all of this press this week around OpenAI is that they asked their investors to not invest in any of the competitors, which is...
Doesn't everyone do this?
It sends a weird signal. I don't know. It's like, why all of a sudden now do they care? I think it actually sends people to the competitors.
So we were actually, for some inside baseball, this is interesting. I should have consulted you a few days ago when we were hearing this. And in my news meeting, I was kind of like, would anyone who was taking a big check from an investor want that investor to write a big check in a direct competitor?
Of course not, but a lot of people's investing strategies in LLMs are to just spread across the big, 4 or 5 to hopefully get 1 or 2 of the winners, right?
They're just flexing. It doesn't matter.
Do you think that is of interest that they're asking for that now versus a year ago? Why didn't they care a year ago?
Because they weren't the swinging dicks a year ago. They were still now they think they're the swinging dicks, so they're going to tell the other VCs to stay out.
I don't know. I think they were swinging dicks.
I also think these things happen. I don't think they have you sign this in writing. I think this is all that part of venture capital that you guys won't understand that I don't really understand, which is don't screw me,
Well, duh. Yeah.
I don't know. I agree. People think this is a big deal, Brett. So I don't think it's a big deal,
but people are mostly wrong. What I would say is interesting though is the secondary thing. The secondary thing is interesting because here's the interesting story. There's two forces going on at play here. One is OpenAI's basic strategy is to say that they need so much money to just incinerate it, right? And the thing about secondaries is the way they usually happen early in companies is when the company says, hey, I don't want to give up more equity, but the funds are like, I want to invest more. And so you say, well, fine, like we'll do some secondary things so you can buy up, but we don't have to get more dilution. And so like on one hand, you're like, okay, well, is this investor demand driven? The other side, which is interesting, is like, you know, we're already in a place where companies stay private forever. And OpenAI has been the most extreme version of this ever. And so I do wonder from a talent retention perspective, whether they just have to start offering this because people are like, what the fuck? There's at 150 billion. I'm eating ramen. Like, let me take some equity off the table.
Yeah. And Jess, the other thing that you mentioned was there appears to be some strategy shifts going on here with the product. And one of the things I'm hearing in the back channels is that OpenAI has made a strategy shift in terms of their product strategy. The 4.0 model is a slower model, quite literally. It takes a lot longer to run. It does a lot more sophisticated things. You know, it does more advanced reasoning than anybody else is providing, but it's slower. And, you know, they've pretty visibly stopped investing in this search GPT thing. And so on the one hand, you have Perplexity and Google competing over speed models, right? How fast can you answer the question? Can you sort of be in this search world on the one hand? And then on the other hand, you've got OpenAI tacking in a totally different direction, which is, you know, can we provide the most high quality, you know, slower models, but better reasoning, right? And I think that that's perhaps one of the most interesting divergences in the game right now that I think is very interesting.
Dave, do you think that signals a sort of consumer versus enterprise divide in terms of focus? Like the bulk of OpenAI's revenue, I believe, will ultimately like come from businesses, but like that's a very different use case than the sort of like chatbot.
It's hard to say. I mean, I think you've got Anthropic out there also that seems to be going far more enterprise. You know, if you talk to developers on the ground, a lot of people are using Anthropic right now because the Sonnet model is extremely sophisticated, particularly for doing things related to software engineering. And so, you know, clearly they're kind of in tandem with Amazon, chasing the more, you know, and maybe with Cohere and a couple others, kind of chasing the more enterprise story, because enterprises want to do things on premise. They've got different needs in a lot of cases than what the core models are providing. And so I think, to answer your question very directly, I think this is actually more consumer driven, that people that are interacting with these things are trying to learn how to use them. And OpenAI is seeing that people don't really know how to interact with a chatbot and get the answers that they want. And so they're having to switch it's not exactly a user experience change, but it is in terms of providing a longer response time, but giving you a better response to a more general query that you're asking the thing. And that's something that they're going to need to do to scale to a lot more people on the consumer side.
Okay, guys, we got to get back. AI.
This is AI.
Bring us back.
This is AI.
Guys, the agents are here. They're here. We've been waiting for these agents. We've been waiting to go.
What agent are you using?
Wait, there's agents at your door?
Maybe. That's a different topic. There's just constant UPS people.
All the AI agents do.
AI agents.
Google today has shown some agents, and these agents can do things for you. Let me give you they changed the name, so I can't remember the name now, but now we're moving from worlds of AI that are chatbots that give us information to doing things like build a spreadsheet or call to make this reservation or so on and so forth. I know the answer to this, but Sam, what do you think about agents? It's going to be the buzzword of 2025. It's going to be everywhere.
I think 2014 called and wants its Alexa marketing back. I mean, like, totally. It's like, I don't think people, it's not that I think the technology isn't marginally improving, but here's the biggest thing I think people don't understand is the problem with agents historically has not only been they don't work, is that the economics make no sense, right? And so here's the way to think about it is everyone has this dream that you're going to have this like agent that like does this shit. It buys you plane tickets or it, I say, hey, I want to catch up with Dave once a month, make sure our calendars sync up, book us a restaurant, blah, 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 blah. It just magically happens.
I'd like that to happen.
That would be awesome. That's the dream.
We have to talk about social calendar planning for 2025, by the way. That's a different topic.
That's the dream. Yeah. Here's the problem that people don't understand. There's two issues. One is like actually plugging together the APIs and getting it to work, which is pretty hard. And it's easy to say, hard to do. Two is even once you've done it, there's this very deep economics problem, which is what you really need for any compound task that's valuable is for agents to be able to act in the real world for you, right? Book a plane ticket, etc. If it costs $0 to use the agent and there is any error rate, and there will be an error rate, right?
Absolutely.
You have no margin to pay back for the errors. So the reason that DoorDash works, for instance, is an economic reason, which is they charge a ton of money for food delivery, and then their error rate is low enough, maybe it's 5% of the time it breaks, that they can comp you back when it's broken and not break their business model. And the thing I don't get, among many things about this agents happening now, is I just don't see, having spent time with Finn, with Andrew Cortina, building versions of this before, it wasn't, people are always like, well, would it work now because AI is better and you kind of anticipated this but early? And my answer is always no.
I agree
and it's
with you.
not, it's because you don't understand. The problem with Finn was not that the cost of service was low. It was that it was too high. It was that there's always going to be, no matter how good you are, let's put even a 1% error rate. And if you're trying to charge too little for the service of matchmaking, right, relative to the cost of services you're providing, it will always break the business model, right, is my basic point.
Insightful. I feel like what, Sam, just to give you a little bit of credit, which I don't think a lot of the listeners totally realize, like, when you were building, you built this company called Finn, which at the time we were calling the artificial intelligence space.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it goes back and even further. This was a conversation we were having years prior to you building that company as well. But I don't think, maybe give people a little bit of context as to why this point you just made is I think pretty insightful, because most people aren't talking about the error side of the economic model.
Yeah, so look, I mean, if you go back a bunch of years, you and me and Justin Schaefer, much people would run around the world yelling, operator, do blah, 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 right? It was very obvious then, we called the agent operator, that's kind of what you wanted, was the interfaceless.
I even built a little app for myself called Operator that I got I got slayed in the media for.
It's like, and it's a great vision, and it is kind of what it would be to have like a perfect on-demand assistant, right? And so years later, Cortina, who founded Venmo, and I went off, and we just said, look, we're going to start a company called the Finn Exploration Company. And we basically raised some money and told the investors we literally were going to lose all the money from day one. It was like the anti-pitch pitch. But the idea was, look, we know this is coming. Can we front run it and figure out how to do a hybrid human in the loop hybrid system? We used actually a bunch of very cool quote unquote AI. We called it machine learning then, to capture preferences, to prioritize tasks, to anticipate how long. It was like we did a bunch of really cool stuff to make it happen, but we ultimately glued it together with some human operators in the middle. And we ran the service for thousands of people and, made millions of dollars doing it. We ultimately pivoted the company over time, which we could get into. But in that experience, it was actually awesome. Like, I used it a bunch, et cetera. It was not cheap because we had to pay for the people, but it wasn't astronomically expensive. It was certainly a lot less expensive than having a human assistant full 24/7 and available all the time. But yeah, this is what we discovered, is that the problem was not at all, can you fulfill the tasks? It was, no matter how good you are, you're going to run, maybe you're running a 3% error rate or a 2% error rate. Maybe with AI, you get that to a 1% error rate, but the math still stacks the same way.
There's still an error
There's
rate.
going to be an error rate. And if you're the person in front of all the services, it's your problem, right? It doesn't matter if someone makes an error downstream, a car doesn't show up, whatever, it's your problem, right? And so you have to be able, in an economic position, to pay for the errors, right? And if you're booking first class tickets, good luck, right? You kind of go down the chain. But I think that's the thing people don't understand about these agents is, yeah, you could probably get it to like calendar for you.
Insightful.
There's some basic low risk digital tasks they can do, but the real vision of how do you get agents to act in the real world on your behalf is much more of an economic problem than it is a technological one.
So, Sam, given everything you know on this, what do you think the path for Google to deploying them is? Like, should it just use it so it's like a feature of Sheets or a feature of Gmail or?
I mean,
isn't the most amazing part about this and like why Google might actually win this race because they have Chrome, they have the browser. And what is, it's called Project Mariner. It's a Chrome extension. So anytime you're browsing the web, you hit your Chrome extension button and then you can ask your agent to do shit for you on that website, like fill out the form, check out, find whatever. And I think that like plays to Google's advantage in the AI race that they have Chrome. Like OpenAI doesn't have a browser that they can install this into, and Apple's certainly not like ahead in this race with Safari.
Sounds like an antitrust suit to me.
Well, I was gonna say,
I know.
I think it's further than this. I mean, so I've had access to this product for several weeks to a month.
Oh my, Dave, you got to lead the conversation with that.
Well, you asked Sam first. What do you want?
I don't have access to shit. They keep me on the blacklist.
They know Sam hates AI. They don't give him access.
They swore me to secrecy. Sam's right about acting in the real world. Sam, you might even be right that this is sort of a linear improvement in the march towards better digital AI. But the one thing I will say is that I think they call it, Gemini in deep research mode, is really impressive. I actually think it's the first Gemini product that they've launched that just screams Google to me. It's really impressive what it does. And I think it, to Britt's point, brings together some of the things that make Google. It's like their power alley is not just Chrome, but it's also they're best in the world at crawling, right? They're best in the world at search.
And quantum computing, we have to talk about that.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, we can talk about the quantum stuff, but what's so cool about deep research is you ask it a question and you're like, go research this for me. And it spends like sometimes 5 minutes and it rips through. It's like, I just browsed 100 or 1,000 websites and I pulled it all together into this. And would you like that put into a Google Doc or a Google Sheet? And I've been shocked at the kinds of queries that it can do that none of the other models can. And a lot of them are things like the stuff that you do want to research. You want to research, Sam, the thing earlier, like you want to research a new component for your Cirrus, or you want to research like, how do I technically add this piece to any system that I'm thinking about modifying, whether it's software or a car, right? Like it'll go out and research every single product, tell you the entire universe, put it in a spreadsheet, give you its opinion. It's really, to me, like the Google way of going about doing this interface. And it's the first one of these that I've seen them do that really knocks that out of the park, in my opinion.
For what it's worth, I actually buy this direction. I'll tell you, I this week did a set of queries on OpenAI, ChatGPT, not Gemini, but that actually was the first time in a while I was like, that's pretty freaking good. Which is, I wanted to look for all, I asked it, go across all the schools of Harvard and tell me which ones have updated their mission in the last year and how, in the last 10 years and how they updated it. This is actually hard as a human. Like it would be difficult to do that. And it did a pretty darn good job of giving me the answers, which I then validated and actually was basically right. And so those types of complex queries for web pages that don't exist in the world are clearly valuable, right? And like, I don't know how commoditized they become. I also don't know how long the web survives it, because when you take away the business model, right, it'll collapse.
For what it's worth, I agree with that. Like as I was doing this a bunch the last few weeks, it just, the web person, the person who's loved the web so dearly inside of me was dying inside a little bit, because it just feels like I don't know where the web goes from here. And what's the incentive to put things on the web, and where do you put them, and how do you interact with these things, and what does that mean for human knowledge and the internet? Right?
It's actually not this dissimilar to the conversation you're having at these agents in the real world, which is technologists look at these problems as technology problems, but they're actually economics problems, right? Like the internet pumped a bunch of knowledge out of people's brains and put it in a specific style on the web, and it worked in certain ways and it failed in certain ways. And a lot of places that end up buying towards entertainment because entertainment monetizes better. But like the medium is the message, right? And so to that extent, I think we're just in an interesting point where like the sociology and economics become more important again, and we're about to shake up the board a bunch.
Yeah, for sure.
Before we get into that, can you just wax poetic on why AI is the most important thing in the history of the world?
I mean, maybe you should wax poetic on why it's not.
No, you first.
I think he will. I think he will. Why don't you go first, Aaron?
I mean, and this is all sort of non-AGI pitch.
So it's crypto, but not anything but social. Sorry, not Web3, and it's AI, but it's not AGI. We've got to define terms here.
That's actually a pretty good framework, Sam. AGI is the Web3 of AI.
I think it might be.
I like that.
Oh, goodness. Okay. We've lost everyone now. They're all gone.
Okay. No, this is as inside baseball as it gets. Let's keep going. We try to be as inside baseball as possible here.
Okay, so basically the if you just assume, because we're not there yet, to be clear. So, but if you assume that an AI model has 98%, 99.999% accuracy,
that's a hell of an assumption. Keep going.
That's fine. But let's say we're like,
accuracy for what?
For just like I ask you a question and it gets back to the right answer. So. Okay. And it can use other tools. It can use the internet. But like it has a good reasoning engine to kind of find eventually the right answer. Okay.
And it's licensed all the news content in the world too, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All these little things
in a fair marketplace of economic exchange. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So assume it hasn't been sued out of existence by Barry Diller. Okay. So it's 99.999% accurate. It's like super cheap. Like you ask a question, you get back an answer in a tenth of a penny. It's instantaneous because NVIDIA makes everything 10 times faster. Let's just pretend that we can get there in 2, 3, 5 years. Okay.
In your magical world, continue.
But Sam, do you see any flaws with any of those parameters?
I'm happy to have an intellectual debate on these parameters. Keep going.
Because like this is not supposed to be the crazy part. So like this is like
I'm just confused. I see that you responded.
Easily agree with this.
You responded to a tweet on 11/22 saying RFK is the only thing in the way of AGI. So, does that mean you actually do think AGI is coming?
So
you printed all your tweets out.
No, there's a search field on Twitter.
Was there an image or a quote tweet? What was in the body of that content?
What are we even doing here?
It was a reply to something called bladder that you made.
This is like the problem with trying to bring shit posting into the verbal world. It makes absolutely no sense.
Aaron, you got to accelerate your explanation.
They're like different dimensions
of the promise of AI.
Okay. I just wanted to see if Sam and I could align on even the concept.
On anything.
Yeah.
So, but if you agree with everything I just said, which Sam doesn't,
but I'm happy to entertain it.
Okay. So if you agree with that, then I mean that's just like guaranteed to be, I don't know, $500 billion of software that will get built, $1 trillion of software that will get built that can leverage that. If you can just literally automate any sort of just operational task in an enterprise, that's like all enterprise software does at the end of the day. Like all we do is build software so people can log in and perform a task. And if that task can become a tenth of the price that it was previously, that's just pure operational efficiency and GDP value that gets created. So
isn't it very deflationary though? It's like, yeah, you added $500 billion of AI and you're going to remove $500 billion of Box.net stock. Cause like, why do I need you?
Well, we're going to be the one that.
Oh, you're the one who's going to win. Got it.
Of course. What are you talking about? No, because that requires like a pretty zero sum mindset that imagines that like we've reached peak software and like software just does all the things that it'll ever do, and this is only deflationary. Like that to me is a tough premise, and I know that you're investing only in like in yard businesses, but
lumber manufacturing, painting.
Hey, let him speak for himself.
He's right though.
But like I just don't think we're at peak software. Like if you go to the businesses and government agencies that I've been to, we are not at like peak digitization. So if the next frontier is that you can just automate all of the other workflows that didn't get automated because the first wave of automation was pretty rigid, and the next wave is much more dynamic and it can automate a much wider set of workflows, that's going to be just pure revenue in the form of now doesn't mean that it's all startups. It's going to be Salesforce and it's going to be ServiceNow. It's going to be Oracle. And it's going to be Box.net, which is not our official brand. We will capture collectively all of that. I think that the startups that are doing something more disruptive, i.e., pure agents that go after a particular role or function, like those will probably work better than trying to be like the AI CRM company. But there's room for opportunity, I think, out of all stages. And at the same time, there'll be lots of companies that just blow billions of dollars doing, training runs of a model that get, supplanted instantly by Llama. Like So there's no question that you're going to see all of this.
Aaron, if I jump off from where you're going, one of the ways that I like to think about this is that we're on the precipice of like the personal app revolution. If you look at it as like there are, call it 5, 10, I don't know, it depends on what number you look at and which framework you look at, but there's millions to tens of millions of software engineers, developers out there, right? Building software that 1 to 2 to 3 billion people use. So there's a massive gap in the number of people who can create software today and the number of people who use software every day, whether that's to, look at a funny shit post on Twitter from you or Sam, or doing some work on a productivity app, right? And up until this point, you've had to depend on organizations like yours to develop that software, right? To do whatever. And it seemed as though if the vision that you're articulating is right, where, we've got these 99.99999% great models that can do everything from talk to me in English to build software, that more people are going to be building software for themselves and for their teams at work, for their organizations than like ever before, right? And so that's a big shift in how a company like yours has to think about who you're selling to. And so are you thinking about this future? And are you thinking about how to build your ecosystem around not just the consumer that's saving files into a box, and not just the enterprise who needs to deploy a big enterprise productivity tool, but this sort of middle zone of like the new software creator that is going to create a tool for themselves? And how does your world fit into that, as this sort of Cambrian explosion of new software developers happens?
I can answer that. Sam, did you have a well or something?
No, you do that, and then I'm going to do my straw man for you.
Okay, great. Oh no, it's the straw man. Okay, so yes, absolutely. It won't exactly. So some of where my head goes when you said all that was literally like creating new applications, through an LLM or whatnot. Our version is still going to be like our interface that's already built, but a lot of the logic can be accelerated. The workflow can be customized, due to AI. So just like the 12-second sales pitch is, we literally just launched a no-code app builder where you can be like, boom, I want Box to look like a digital asset management system, or a boom, I want Box to look like a contract management system. And
That's cool.
It's not going to render a probabilistic UI every single time. We give it the UI components, but the ability to instantly create that and have it work is absolutely enabled by everything that we're seeing in AI today. So I totally subscribe to the thesis that you just said. There'll be way more software, 10 times the amount of software that gets created, and then there'll be and then the other 10x is just like things that don't necessarily need to like create software per se, but I am pretty bullish on just general agenticness of AI. Like I'm pretty convinced. I don't know if you tried the new like Gemini, for instance, voice.
Let me push you on two things. One, I know I accept
Sam has something to say. Aaron.
I have a few things to push you on. First, I'm curious.
I'm surprised.
You have a vision that AI gets you to we'll call it 4 nines of accuracy. Mm-hmm. Does your whatever number of ridiculous nines you believe, what if it only gets to 1 9?
Yeah.
Does it change how you think about the world? If it turns out it asymptotes faster than bulls think it will in terms of accuracy?
Well,
most inside baseball question ever.
It's a good question.
No, I mean, it's like, I'm just saying, like, I think one really important question is like, yes, I mean, obviously, if you can get to a ton of nines, if a thing is basically perfect, that's very disruptive.
Yeah.
We have a long history in society, especially in technology, of, technologists like to make fun of non-technologists and say, you don't understand exponentiality. And then I think a lot of people like to make fun of technologists and say, you don't understand S-curves, right? It really matters where things tap out. And the question for me is, this happened in self-driving. People were 10 years too early, things like that. If you're wrong, we don't have to argue if you are or not, and it taps out sooner, does it change how you think about the meaningful opportunity in AI?
If I'm wrong and it taps out sooner, then I think you would just have exactly what AI is good at today, plus 20% or whatever, and then fully extrapolate it out. So that to me is That pays for all the VC funding.
It certainly pays, and for Meta, sure. For ad targeting, I'm with you, right? For a few things.
I think it would pay for Cursor, and it would pay for the coding apps. It would pay for
doesn't pay for NVIDIA.
But wait a second. Some of these things are losing $5 billion a year. OpenAI pay for what? I mean, your point is that what can be built, there are businesses still, but
Dave's point kind of hit it. Like today's AI, if you do Gemini voice, if you do, ChatGPT voice, Perplexity, whatever, you choose your thing. Even with today's AI, I've already shifted my search behavior. So you just you start to monetize that, in an appropriate way to the behavior shift.
Well, but just to push you, what if it monetizes worse? Which just goes to my deflationary point.
It might.
Well, but I would take the counter on that. Like if I could talk to my phone and say, book me X restaurant, and it just.
But you can't.
Why can't you?
It doesn't work.
5 years from now, you will, Sam.
Even if that does work, though, that's actually worse. I mean, this goes back to the whole classic shift to mobile, right? Like, it's just not clear. Just because something is more efficient doesn't make it a better advertising
that's
service.
Not a 10 blue links. That's a 1 blue link.
Right. Doesn't make it a better monetizing service.
I don't know.
I shouldn't have to tell you guys this on the consumer side. Like literally, like as we've seen, every time there's been any efficiency gain in people discovering things, they just buy more stuff. They transact more. They do more commerce. So if you can lower the barrier to me going out for dinner.
Yeah, it strikes me that shopping alone, shopping's going to be extraordinary when it actually starts working.
No, for what it's worth, I would actually push you guys to decompose this a little bit. And then I want to get into my second.
Sam's like, I don't shop, Aaron.
I shop incessantly at weird hours on Instagram because the ads are perfectly targeted.
That's not shopping, Sam. That's eating what you're being fed.
No, that is literally a definition of shopping. But my first thing is I say there are things in the world that have expanded. Let's talk about consumer stuff that have expanded time spent and engagement significantly. More time spent, more engagement generally means more monetization. There's just more to work with, right? You have more places for inventory. Fine. I would argue that, again, without getting into a whole second set of arguments, AI today, even if you're a really big bull and you think that Gemini and OpenAI is better at answers, is not actually going to expand inventory, right? If anything, it collapses inventory because you're doing fewer searches, right? It just gives you the answer. There's no looking at websites. There is less surface to monetize, right? And so that is your first problem. Your second problem is you can make the ad markets or the engagement markets or the shopping, if you want to call it, be nice about it, more targeted, right? And deliver me the better thing more efficiently, right? That can drive rates up, right? That can offset lower inventory, but it's just not more efficiency in commerce doesn't necessarily at all lead to an expanded market, right? In some ways, it can be deflationary. So I'm just kind of curious. It can very
much change who the tax collectors are or the rent collector, right?
Who gets to monetize that? There's no question that your scenario could play out 100%. But to me, if the cost of lifting up my phone and asking a question has gone down by another 70%, then all I have to think about is, will I do more things on my device that then Apple monetizes, Google monetizes, OpenAI monetizes in the world? And that's why I think it will counteract whatever your sort of 10 blue link shift is.
Well, that would be the question. The question is if you saw Gemini, and just hypothetically in today's technology, if you saw that Gemini dramatically expanded the number of queries per day someone runs, I'm with you. I don't think it does. I think if anything, especially if you believe in an agentic future, it should actually drive it down, not.
But my queries on Google are like find me this one random link from 17 years ago.
So this is I want to go into a third thing, which I actually care about, but just to push on the second thing. This is the second thing about it, which is everyone talks about how with this new AI, there'll be all these new use cases and all this. The reality is almost all Google searches are for 6 things. Yeah. Right. The internet is actually much smaller. People's demands are much smaller than people think they are. The internet is very large, but the actual used internet is actually quite small. And so I do wonder to what degree that this is a little bit of navel gazing of all these great uses for, I'm going to do all these great things, when the reality is is like people do like 4 things.
Any question to that point will either seem visionary or out of touch. So let's just see where it goes.
Go both. Do both.
If Google operated one particular way 3 years ago, and you just knew, why would I Google this random question when I know that I don't want to go to WebMD to go peruse some kind of like crazy set of articles? But now I just pull up my phone and I say, how much Tylenol do you give a 5-year-old when they're sick? And then it says like 5 milliliters. And then do you want us to ship it to you right now through DoorDash or Instacart? And you press yes. Like I didn't do that Google query 3 years ago.
But just to push you, 2 problems with that. One is, this is my how many nines
You need
question.
to know the weight of the child, okay? That's the first problem.
But the first question I have with it is like, that actually, the number of 9s on that really matters. Because if that's 90% right versus a 99.999%, it has real medical implications. Second, to the point about commerce, if your kid needs Tylenol, it doesn't matter if it takes you 4 clicks or 1 click, you're still buying the fucking Tylenol, right? So like, why does it matter?
Maybe I chose the least discretionary of use cases, but like.
Yeah, one thing I think a lot about from the AI point of view is we're going to be relying more and more on agents to go and get information for us.
Correct.
And that's already happening with Perplexity. It's already happening with the AI overview panel on Google Search. And so if what you're producing is content that is sort of like facts and general knowledge, it's very likely that you're not even going to get backlinks, because someone's going to search on Google, for example, what is HTTP? It used to be a valid content marketing strategy, and like marketers in the Valley used to do this, like create a lot of content so that when people search, you'll hit the keywords and whatever. But increasingly, a lot of that traffic will just stay in the AI front ends, right? Because it becomes part of the AI overview, or it becomes part of the Perplexity summary. I think the opportunity is actually, interestingly, in focusing on the individual perspective, focusing on like the kind of, I actually see the stuff that you post, like this big images on Twitter, which I actually kind of hate them because I can't read.
Yeah, you're not the only one that hates them. You know what I'm going to do about it? Nothing.
Did you pay him to say that, Sam? I mean, that was like the perfect. Okay, keep going.
Like you're never going to get summarized away by AI overview. This is Sam's perspective. You know?
Some might say I was ahead of my time. I'm worried about the image scraping eventually.
Yeah.
But I mean, some might say I was ahead of my time in being anti-AI-able.
The question is whether the AI even cares. Yeah.
Some might say.
So I call this like frontier content. When you have content that kind of like bypasses the great AI filter, and most of that I think is going to be experiential, like personal. It's probably going to amplify a lot of hot takes and like things that the For You algorithm likes in general, which is like a strong opinion that someone holds. That again, like it goes beyond the purview of AI. I actually think another thing that's really interesting about Twitter is that they have this like Grok summaries. Like Grok is deciding what the trends are. I don't know if you've all gotten them, but like Grok decides to say, what's important today is that Kamala finally concedes to Trump. So we are starting to see sort of like AIs act as like the editorial room of a lot of the content that we create. But after you click that, we're still there. So,
but that's fucked. I mean, like, like just to push you, like the thing that I think people really miss about this is like that's fine at a first blush, but people forget that the internet is not just an information platform. Technically, it's an information economy. It's a content economy. And the thing I think that's so fucked about this whole AI move is like, in the one boxes in the direction is like, you're just going to break the entire machine for truth, right? Because you just get a reflection of whatever the economics are of the system. And if the economics are, oh, we're just going to like, there's no way to monetize it, you know, or even now it's like, it's easy to monetize hot takes, but not actual information or truth, then like, you're screwed. Like you're just going to end up like completely stemming the entire information as an information machine. So I don't know. I understand. I think you're right that that's the direction we'll head in, but it is like a total tragedy of the commons where like these things are going to consume themselves and die.
But Sam, I think that this is the reason that maybe the commons is a tragedy and that we should move in the direction of this era of more personal apps, right? And more like not just more personal apps, but smaller social contracts, right? Like, the ability to create a app for, a smaller community that you're a part of and do it very quickly. And, these types of things. And Guillermo was one of the first ones that really, I think, clarified. Guillermo, I think you were telling me in Japan that there's something like 4 million software engineers on Earth today. That's a really small number.
Yeah, for what we do, which is React, which is like the front end, there's 4 million is the best estimate we get from Google. And for creating interfaces, which is very much like a design thing, right? Like it's like a creative act. It's very small. Like we should get like 1 billion people creating software. And I think, Dave, this is also, I think, kind of like part of your journey is if you get everybody to create software, you're now like decentralizing it.
Yeah.
You're creating less like software that tries to do everything.
Yeah.
So like less Salesforce. It's like the tower is like right next to our office. Salesforce is a thing that like Katamari like absorbs more and more software. There's a banger thread on X about like how like Salesforce built itself through M&A.
Yeah.
Like how they bought Marketing Cloud and Salesforce Commerce Cloud and
it's
whatever.
Like Instagram and X and all these things are like the low income housing of the internet. And like we need to like move people out of these things into their own housing, right? And enable infrastructure that like helps people talk to each other.
Can I just play devil's advocates on a few points? I like everything you guys are saying and think it's probably right.
I don't.
No, you have to like this one. This one is like objective. Who likes huge bundles of software instead of software that is curated to you and created by you?
Totally personalized. Yeah.
Well, a couple of people. One, people who still don't want to do the work. So yes, the barrier to entry or ceiling or whatever could plummet, but it is still more work for me to build my own social media site than to use another one. And then there are other things like network effects and economies of scale that come in. Also, I thought it was really interesting. At some point, Britt, I think you were there for this at our women's event this year. I was asking someone about what new things are going to be built with AI. And they were basically saying, like a personalized internet. And then they began describing something that was essentially Yahoo. Like it wasn't, but it sort of was, right? And so I think the history of a lot of these things like tends towards personalization, but we haven't all built our own like decentralized banking systems yet, which is maybe possible. So I don't know, like there's one point of view, which just the tools aren't good enough yet. And I think that's probably what you guys would say.
By the way, we kind of have, actually, I would argue. So I have two interesting arguments for you. One is, imagine if creating the information.com had taken you a fraction of the time and resources, like the software of it.
It had nothing to do with the software. The software was already easy. I mean, this is my kind of thing with you, is that the software is not...
It's easy, but it's not. For example,
totally
I'll give you a very concrete example that our customers face challenges with. A lot of our customers have complex business models, like 5 free articles, and it can't be gamed. And Google needs to get the full version of the article. But also, like, you have like one-time article share URLs. Like, these things are not trivial, actually. To do them well and to do it with high performance and high conversion rates, this is why customers come to us all the time saying, like, I need to migrate off this pile of junk that I have. Please make it fast and delightful and personalized. And so if we can lower the barrier to entry so that there's more Jessica lessons out there, because she's using AI.
But just to put, I think the thing you're missing, that is not the barrier to the information. Right? The barrier to the information is actually like good reporting, like the work of being a journalist, whatever else. I agree that like having actually in the early days as an intern built a lot of these things that like, permalinks and like share article infrastructure, whatever, is like, it's not trivial, but it's damn close to trivial already. And it's certainly tending that way. So I think you can probably lower the barrier a little bit.
It's tending that way because of AI. And it's going to get easier and easier and easier.
It's tending that way for a lot of reasons.
I mean, it's just trending that way.
It's it's been trending that way forever. It's trending that way. I mean, like, so it'll keep trending that way.
AI
I agree
is a profound sea change, you guys.
And that's the thing. So we have basically, by the way, if I were to summarize the step function changes, we have on-prem, really hard. Like, actually, that was like legitimately hard. You had to buy software and throw it into the information's closet. Then we got cloud.
Yep.
Still pretty hard, actually, like figuring out all these instances and networks and whatever and infrastructure. Then we got serverless. That's the space where Vercel lives in. And now we're getting AI, which that is another 10x. So if we start from on-prem to AI-generated personal software, it became 1,000 times easier. And if it becomes 1,000 times easier, you need less of these like super apps. And
well,
you can,
but just to push you again, like, look, I agree. I think we'll all agree with the broad trend, but like right now, like take Jessica's business, for instance, her information business. Like what happens right now, practically speaking, you have a bunch of non-technical people that used to start out on WordPress and it was kind of annoying to customize. Then they kind of started on Substack and went for a while. Then like, oh, Substack sucks and they charge too much. So they switched to Ghost, which is the same thing, but easier, right? You could say, hey, Ghost has its limitations. And by the way, we can do AI Ghost and like you can have it more custom. Sure, you can do that. And I think there's some marginal advantage to it. But in my mind, that's like a 5 to 10% problem of like more great businesses, not like the 90% problem. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but like it does mean like to me, it fits very nicely into trajectory of like, yes, it's much easier to start all sorts of businesses for all sorts of technical reasons, right?
Yeah, I think my point of view is generating software is actually the killer app of AI. I was interviewing Nat Freeman today for our internal Vercel podcast today, and he was talking about how much conviction Microsoft got into OpenAI because of the effectiveness of Copilot. Like when Satya saw Copilot, when they were doing the initial iterations, they had actually way more ambitious applications they wanted to create with AI. And the one that ended up being the killer app is making people more productive at producing code. And what's happening now is that because the models are getting so much better, we're finding out that we need to make the models better for producing code. And so you use something like Claude, and which is actually one of the main models that powers V0. And it became like 10 times better at designing software all of a sudden. It became 10 times better at creating React applications. And so let's just look at the numbers, right? Like there's 4 million React developers. I can move that from 4 million to 50 million trivially, because now like you just speak English to that thing. Even if like it doesn't do 100% of the job, it's just like this like infinitely available assistant.
So my push to you as an asshole venture capitalist is I think you're on the right side of history, but it's not clear to me how you get paid a lot for it, because there's a lot of ways you'll get there. And like, it's just generally true that the barriers to entry on doing lots of this stuff are going to come down. You know, building software is nice. I do it all the time, and like people will build a lot more of it. But if the marginal cost of building it goes towards zero, and like that's the general trend of history, my big concern for your company will be you're not going to get paid enough for it, right? Because like it'll be commodity.
Well, you still need the infrastructure to run it, right? So it's not just about like writing the code, but if you merge writing the code, if you merge a great experience for designing, if you put in a lot of the taste that I think is really important into the process from the creator point of view, because AI mostly generates a slop. That's something I agree with you, actually. Like, we do have to hold AI to like an insanely high bar because there's way too much spending and way too much hype. And a lot of it is the slop. It's just like a lot of it looks horrible. And one of the things that actually we've differentiated in is the vast majority of generations we produce embed our taste into how we would design software. They embed even our like sort of like design system component library, and from there on we allow you to customize things. So you have to find that sort of balance between it has to be really easy, but also has to be high quality, but also customizable. And I do think that making something 10 times or 100 times more abundant will have very, very, very deep implications to the industry.
We talk a lot about startups on this pod, and we talk a lot about how much the venture capital model has changed dramatically in a way that's really bad for a lot of startups. I'm kind of curious, like, what's a non-obvious startup that you're kind of excited or intrigued by that you think kind of shows something in the ecosystem people could be missing?
Well, I mean, it's as of yesterday, it's not a surprise to anybody. I was really excited about Polymarket before it blew up because I unlike I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I try to stay true to my convictions unless I have overwhelming evidence to the contrary. I was an early adopter of Bitcoin, and I never saw anything that would change my mind about it, like the way that people in Silicon Valley have been like pivoting away from it. Like there was no new news, like nothing broke about the cryptography, nothing changed about like the fundamental promise of it, et cetera. But like the whole Silicon Valley switched to like AI, I guess, like if you're in crypto, pivot to AI, right? And I was actually chatting with someone about this yesterday. It's like, it's kind of incredible how bipolar we can be in like chasing these hype waves. Whereas what I saw in Polymarket and I'm starting to see in a lot of other companies is give value to the customer and use decentralized infrastructure under the hood, but don't lead with the decentralized infrastructure. That's just an implementation detail. And so Polymarket is the first company that there's been a few, but
there's a lot. But yeah, I agree with this.
No, but nothing screams crypto about it. I was actually opening it yesterday because I was curious about how the election was going, and that is really cool because I think we're gonna see a lot. I was chatting with the head of crypto at Stripe. I'm excited about stable coins as well. So this is also kind of true to the promise of Vercel. Focus on the front end experience and plug in whatever stuff you want on the back end. In fact, plug in the one that benefits your business the most, whatever is a different payment gateway, whatever is a different content system, database, whatever. We don't care as long as the experience is fast and delightful. So that was one that comes to mind really quickly, but I'll hit you up if I had another one. Next question.
Well, I applaud you for not actually, I don't think, having AI anywhere on your, no, deploy AI apps in seconds. You almost don't say AI on your homepage, because I agree with that the second that this is actually true of most things is whenever people are excited about infrastructure, beware, right? Like infrastructure should disappear. That's the point of infrastructure. And it only gets exciting once it's gone.
Aligned.
So you almost don't say AI on your homepage, almost.
Yeah, it should be great products.
And that was part 1 of the More or Less Highlights special. I'm really glad I got to focus on AI, and it's been a jam-packed year to say the least. It was good to recap, and now I'm looking forward to what AI will bring in 2025. I think we can all agree that it's been quite an exciting year. And while AI is on everyone's minds, there have been many more exciting shifts in our world too. See you next week in part 2 of our holiday special.